The man on the ladder wasn't supposed to die that day. Neither was I, technically, but that's a different story for a different video. He was clearing gutters, third house on Maple Street. A crow landed on the power line above him, tilted its head, and made a sound I can only describe as a laugh with consonants in it. He looked up, he lost his footing. On the way down, he grabbed the gutter, which had been loose since approximately the Clinton administration, and the gutter did not agree to come with him. It let go at the last second, which somehow made things worse. He hit the hedge. The hedge broke his fall. His dignity did not survive the landing. Here's the part nobody expects. The crow didn't fly away. It hopped down onto the lawn, walked over, and looked directly into his face from about 4 feet away, the exact distance you'd stand from someone you were sizing up for a job interview. Then it walked off, unbothered, like a coworker who just watched you spill coffee on the CEO and decided this was information worth keeping. That crow remembered his face for the rest of its life. That's not a metaphor. That's a documented neurological fact we'll get to in about 4 minutes. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up here. Oh, hey there. I didn't die because of the crow, for the record. I died a completely unrelated and frankly more embarrassing death that I'm not covering today. But somewhere in the process of becoming whatever I am now, a consciousness with excellent seating and 0 physical needs, I ended up parked on power lines, fence posts, and one memorable dumpster for what I can only estimate is several human lifetimes, watching crows do the single most quietly disrespectful thing any animal does to our species. They study us, deliberately, methodically, and they take notes. So, let's talk about what's actually happening behind those eyes, because I promise you it is weirder, smarter, and funnier than anything a nature documentary ever told you. The face in the filing cabinet. Here's the thing that changes everything once you know it. A crow that sees your face while something bad is happening will remember that face. Not recognize crows in general, not remember scary shapes. Your specific face matched against your specific behavior, filed away, sometimes for over a decade. Researchers in Seattle proved this by wearing a rubber caveman mask while trapping and briefly holding wild crows to band them, an unpleasant but harmless experience from the crow's point of view. Years later, people wearing that exact mask, walking the same neighborhoods, doing nothing threatening at all, got mobbed, scolded, and dive-bombed by crows who had never personally been trapped. The birds who'd never even met the mask wearer had learned to fear him too, because the original crows had taught them. Let that sit for a second. It's not just individual memory, it's culture. Word-of-beak information passed down through a social network, still functioning years after the original incident, expanding to include crows that weren't even born yet when it happened. Somewhere out there is a guy in his 60s who has no idea he's still famous in the crow community for something he did once, badly, in a rubber mask. Fast Fact 1. The part of a crow's brain responsible for this kind of facial memory and threat assessment isn't a lump of instinct. It behaves a lot like your amygdala, tucked into a densely packed region called the nidopallium caudolaterale. Translation, crows evolved a completely different brain architecture from mammals. No cortex, no folds, none of the real estate we associate with intelligence, and arrived at basically the same solution anyway. Nature ran the smart animal experiment twice on 2 totally different blueprints and got the same answer both times. You were taught bird-brained as an insult. Evolution was taking notes. Myth 1. True or false? Myth. Birds are stupid because their brains are small. Verdict. False. And kind of embarrassingly false. Size was never the metric that mattered. Density was. A crow's forebrain packs neurons in at a rate that rivals primates, cramming enormous processing power into a skull the size of a walnut. Researchers who study this now use the term feathered apes for corvids, only half joking, because crows and ravens have passed cognitive tests originally designed to separate humans from other animals, tests involving planning, tool use, and understanding cause and effect. Which brings us to something even stranger. The grudge that outlives you. Crows don't just remember threats, they act on grudges with a level of patience that would make a soap opera villain nervous. Documented cases exist of individual crows targeting the same specific person for months, not randomly, not because of general human avoidance, but because that particular person did something once and the crow has decided this is now a running feud. Some ornithologists have had to change their walking routes on their own research campuses because a crow they'd banded years earlier still recognized them and still wasn't over it. This is less wild animal acting on instinct and more coworker who never forgot that one thing you said in a meeting in 2019. Evolution didn't build a forgiving creature. It built an accountant, and you are a line item it has decided not to reconcile.
You're walking through a park you've walked through 100 times. Nothing's different. Except 3 days ago, you helped a city worker capture an injured crow to bring it to a wildlife rehab center. A genuinely kind act. Arguably the nicest thing you did all month. The crow doesn't know that. The crow only knows large primate, hands, restraint, panic. From its perspective, it survived an ambush. It has now filed you under dangerous. You will be scolded on sight for the rest of that bird's life, possibly the rest of your life in that neighborhood, for the crime of trying to save it. This is the cruelest part of crow cognition. It doesn't run a background check on your intentions, it runs a highlight reel of what happened, and you were in it. What is actually going through its head? Here's where I have to be honest with you because I'm dead, not dishonest. We don't know exactly what a crow experiences subjectively. Nobody does. And anyone who tells you otherwise is guessing with confidence. What we do know from behavior and brain activity is that crows show clear signs of stress response, rapid associative learning, and what looks a lot like selective attention, the ability to focus intensely on one perceived threat while filtering out irrelevant information. Known. Crows learn threatening faces in a single exposure. Likely, this involves something functionally similar to fear memory in mammals. Hypothesized, not proven, crows experience something we would recognize as resentment or grudge holding in the human emotional sense. Science can tell you the mechanism, it can't yet tell you what it feels like to be the bird. I'd ask one, but in my experience, they don't do interviews. Rude, considering how much time I've given them. The funeral you weren't invited to. Here's a behavior that gets misreported constantly, usually with a headline that says something like, "Crows mourn their dead," which is dramatic, sells clicks, and isn't quite what's happening. When crows discover a dead crow, they don't quietly grieve. They gather, loudly, sometimes in large numbers, cawing, circling, occasionally diving at the body, and then, often within minutes, they leave the area and avoid it for a while. Researchers studying this behavior found something more useful than sorrow. The gathering functions as a risk assessment. The dead crow is a data point. Something killed this individual, and the living crows are collectively trying to figure out what so they can update their internal map of dangerous locations and dangerous individuals. If a human is standing near the body when the crows arrive, that human frequently becomes a suspect, scolded, mobbed, remembered. You didn't do anything, you were just standing near the scene of the crime, and crows treat circumstantial evidence very seriously. It's less a funeral, more a coroner's inquest with worse manners and considerably more shrieking. In the studies where researchers deliberately placed a dead crow along with a person standing nearby, live crows in the area scolded and mobbed that specific person for weeks afterwards, even when the person had nothing to do with the death. To put that in perspective, imagine getting permanently blacklisted from a restaurant because you happened to be standing near a broken window and every employee who works there for years afterwards was told the story and still glares at you on sight. That's the crow version of due process. But before we get to that, let's talk about something even more absurd than crow grudges. Crow economics, the caching con artist. Crows cache food. Not remarkable on its own. Plenty of animals do. What's remarkable is that crows cache deceptively, specifically when they know they're being watched. If a crow senses a rival nearby, it will often perform an elaborate fake burial, going through all the motions of hiding food, digging, placing, covering, without actually leaving any food behind. Or it will return later when it believes it's alone to relocate the real stash to a new spot. This isn't guesswork on the crow's part. Experiments show individual crows adjust their caching behavior specifically based on whether they themselves have stolen from another crow's cache before, as if their own thieving history teaches them exactly how convincing a thief could be and therefore how paranoid to act. This is less small bird hides seed and more tiny caffeinated accountant running a shell company to protect assets from a rival tiny caffeinated accountant. Evolution looked at basic food storage and apparently decided plain honesty wasn't competitive enough. Fast fact 2. Crows can also track dozens, sometimes hundreds of individual cache locations across a landscape, updating their mental map as sites get raided or become unreliable. You've lost your car in a parking garage. A crow has an actual spreadsheet in its skull and is judging you for it. Myth 2. True or false? Myth. Crows just eat garbage and don't really hunt or problem solve for food. Verdict, false. misleading at best. Yes, crows are opportunistic scavengers, and yes, your unattended fries are always at risk. But in parts of Japan, crows have been documented placing hard-shelled nuts on roads at intersections, waiting for cars to run over them, and then retrieving the cracked nuts once traffic stops for the red light, essentially outsourcing nut cracking to a 2-ton machine operated by a species that doesn't even know it's being used. That is not the behavior of an animal that just eats trash. That's an animal that identified free industrial machinery and figured out how to use it around a traffic signal. You've been late to work because you misjudged a yellow light. A crow has already solved that intersection.
The tool nobody taught it to make. Speaking of terrible decisions humans make around wildlife, let's talk about the crow that out-engineered most of us on the first try. New Caledonian crows, a species famous enough in cognitive science circles that they basically have their own fan club, don't just use tools, they manufacture them. They strip and shape twigs into hooks specifically designed to fish larvae out of tight crevices, and they'll modify the hook's angle based on the specific shape of the gap they're working with. In captivity, one individual crow, given a straight piece of wire and a task that required a hook, bent the wire into a hook shape on her first attempt, without ever being shown how, without any hooks in her environment to copy from. That's not instinct performing a fixed motion. That's an animal recognizing a problem, understanding the physical properties of an object, and inventing a solution on the spot, a level of mechanical reasoning we used to assume required a primate brain and opposable thumbs. You needed a YouTube tutorial to assemble a bookshelf. A crow needed 45 seconds and some wire. Evolution breakdown. Why would a bird evolve this? Tool use this sophisticated is metabolically expensive to develop and mentally expensive to maintain. You need memory, spatial reasoning, and the patience to fail before succeeding. The leading explanation is ecological. These crows evolved on islands with limited competition and a food supply, burrowing insect larvae, which was extremely calorie-rich but physically inaccessible without a tool. When the payoff for solving a hard problem is big enough and nothing else is competing for that food source, evolution will apparently just build you an engineer. The group chat you're not in. Crows roost communally, sometimes in the tens of thousands at massive shared gathering sites, and for a long time this looked like nothing more than birds huddling for warmth and safety in numbers. Then researchers noticed something odd. Crows that had been unsuccessful foraging the previous day would often follow well-fed crows away from the roost the next morning, as if tailing someone who clearly knew where the good food was. This is called the information center hypothesis, and while it's not proven beyond doubt, it's well supported. The roost may function less like a bedroom and more like a shared office space, where information about food locations spreads passively just by watching who leaves in which direction and looks confident about it. You've never once successfully guessed which coworker knows where the free food in the break room came from. A crow can identify the office's best-informed member from across a field at dawn without saying a word. Evolution breakdown. Why would a bird evolve this? Tool use this sophisticated is metabolically expensive to develop and mentally expensive to maintain. You need memory, spatial reasoning, and the patience to fail before succeeding. The leading explanation is ecological. These crows evolved on islands with limited competition and a food supply, burrowing insect larvae, which was extremely calorie-rich but physically inaccessible without a tool. When the payoff for solving a hard problem is big enough and nothing else is competing for that food source, evolution will apparently just build you an engineer. The group chat you're not in. Crows roost communally, sometimes in the tens of thousands at massive shared gathering sites, and for a long time this looked like nothing more than birds huddling for warmth and safety in numbers. Then researchers noticed something odd. Crows that had been unsuccessful foraging the previous day would often follow well-fed crows away from the roost the next morning, as if tailing someone who clearly knew where the good food was. This is called the information center hypothesis, and while it's not proven beyond doubt, it's well supported. The roost may function less like a bedroom and more like a shared office space, where information about food locations spreads passively just by watching who leaves in which direction and looks confident about it. You've never once successfully guessed which coworker knows where the free food in the break room came from. A crow can identify the office's best-informed member from across a field at dawn without saying a word. Communal winter roosts of American crows have been documented reaching estimated numbers in the tens of thousands at a single site. To put that in perspective, that's a bird population roughly the size of a small city's downtown workforce, all commuting to the same exact building every single night, then dispersing every morning to dozens of different jobs across dozens of miles, without a single traffic jam, a single dispute over parking, and considerably better punctuality than most actual downtown workforces. The exception that breaks the rule. Here's where nature gets weird, because everything I just told you about grudges and memory has a flip side nobody expects. Crows can also form what looks like genuine positive attachment to specific humans, not just wariness. There are well-documented anecdotal cases, most famously a young girl in the Seattle area who fed crows regularly in her yard for years, of crows bringing small trinkets and shiny objects to leave for the specific human who fed them, buttons, beads, bits of hardware, once even a pearl-colored bead that clearly wasn't food. Nobody claims this is a trade in the human economic sense, and researchers are careful not to overinterpret it. But at minimum, it demonstrates that the same memory system that files you as a threat can also file you as a reliable, safe, positive fixture in the crow's world. And once that happens, you get remembered just as thoroughly, just in the other direction. You spent years trying to make a good first impression at work. A crow will decide you're trustworthy because you left out sunflower seeds on a Tuesday, and it will remember that decision for the rest of its natural life. What is actually going through its head? Round 2. Known, crows can form long-term associations between specific humans and specific positive outcomes. Likely, repeated positive interactions reduce a crow's stress response to that specific individual, not just humans in general. Hypothesized, something resembling trust, though we should be careful projecting a human emotional framework onto a brain built on an entirely different evolutionary branch. A crow trusting you and a crow filing you under reliably produces food might be functionally identical or might feel completely different from the inside. We genuinely don't know, and I'd rather tell you that honestly than make up a nicer answer. The Aesop's fable nobody expected to be real. You know the old fable, a thirsty crow drops stones into a pitcher of water until the water level rises enough to drink. It's ancient, it's a metaphor, it's supposed to be a nice fictional lesson about persistence.
Except when researchers actually tested this with real corvids, rooks and New Caledonian crows specifically, using tubes of water with a floating treat just out of reach. The birds dropped solid objects into the water preferentially over hollow ones, chose larger objects when they'd raise the water level faster, and generally solved the physical puzzle in ways consistent with a basic understanding of displacement. Not perfectly, not like a physicist, and researchers are appropriately cautious about overstating what this proves about the bird's actual understanding of causation versus simple trial and error learning. But the fable, written thousands of years before anyone tested it, turned out to describe a real capability. Somebody wrote a fairy tale as a metaphor for cleverness, and evolution had already been quietly running the real experiment the whole time. Myth 3. True or false? Myth. Crows are bad omens, associated with death because they're somehow drawn to it or cause it. Verdict. False, and it's honestly a public relations disaster crows never deserved. Crows show up around death because they're intelligent generalist scavengers. They notice opportunity fast, and death, unfortunately, produces opportunity. That's it. That's the whole dark reputation. Humans built centuries of folklore, poetry, and horror movie soundtracks around an animal whose actual crime is efficiently notices free food faster than you do. Meanwhile, owls get to be wise for staring blankly at things. The reputation management here has been wildly unfair. The helper who didn't have to help. Which brings us to something even stranger. Crow families don't always look like a simple pair raising chicks alone. In many crow populations, older offspring from previous years stick around and help raise their younger siblings, feeding them, defending the nest, taking on real risk for chicks that aren't their own offspring. From a pure gene survival standpoint, this makes sense once you remember that siblings share a significant portion of your genes too, so helping a sibling survive still helps your genetic line continue, just indirectly. But it's still a level of extended family cooperation that surprises people who assume birds are all lone operators raising one clutch and moving on. Somewhere out there is a juvenile crow who could be off starting its own life, and instead it's home, defending its little siblings from a hawk, for reasons it definitely didn't calculate consciously, but that worked out for the species anyway. Fast Fact 4.
Crows have been observed engaging in what looks unmistakably like play with zero survival function, sliding down snow-covered roofs on their backs repeatedly for no food reward, then walking back up and doing it again. There's no calorie in it, there's no mating advantage. The leading cautious explanation is simply that play behavior helps develop motor skills and cognitive flexibility in young, intelligent animals. The same reasoning that explains why puppies play fight. But watching an intelligent bird slide down a roof purely because it's fun is still, frankly, delightful and also deeply relatable. The exception where ravens enter the chat. I should clear something up because people confuse this constantly, and it's honestly one of my few pet peeves in death. Crows and ravens are related but distinct, and lumping them together erases some genuinely fascinating differences. Ravens are typically larger, often more solitary or paired rather than flocking, tend to soar rather than flap continuously, and have their own separate reputation for problem-solving, including documented cases of ravens using deceptive tactics to protect food caches from other ravens, essentially running the same shell game economics crows run, just with a different corporate structure. If crows are the office workers, ravens are the freelancers. Fewer co-workers, bigger territory, same trust issues. Studies estimate that crow populations across North America number in the tens of millions, meaning at almost any moment across the continent, there are more individual crows quietly cataloging human faces than there are employees at some of the largest corporations on Earth combined. An entire unpaid surveillance workforce that never clocks out, never gets a performance review, and reports directly to itself. So let's finally answer the question in the title, because I've made you wait long enough, and honestly, that's on brand for a ghost. When a crow looks at you, it isn't seeing a generic human being. It's running a specific facial recognition check against a mental filing cabinet built from every prior encounter with people who look, walk, or behave like you. It's cross-referencing your posture for threat signals, sudden movement, raised arms, direct staring, all of which read differently to a crow than casual behavior does. It's factoring in whether you're near food, near a nest, near another crow it doesn't trust, or near the specific spot where something bad happened once, possibly years before you were even born. In other words, it's seeing you as a walking pattern of risk and reward, filtered through years of crow institutional memory, some of which predates your entire relationship with that neighborhood. You've spent your whole life assuming animals barely register your existence. A crow probably has a more detailed and better organized profile on you than most of your actual coworkers. Things I wish I'd told you while I was still alive. Here's what I'd tell you if I could tell you anything, which apparently I can, because here we are. 1. If a crow ever seems unusually aggressive toward you specifically, don't take it personally, and also don't assume it's random. Something, at some point, probably taught that bird you're worth watching. You may never find out what.
2. Never approach a fledgling crow on the ground, even if it looks helpless. Its parents are almost always nearby, watching, and they will remember your face permanently if they perceive you as a threat to their kid. 3. If you're kind to crows consistently, food, water, no sudden aggressive movement, that consistency gets remembered just as thoroughly as cruelty does. The filing cabinet doesn't only hold grudges. 4. Don't assume a group of gathered loud crows around something on the ground is a random disturbance. You may be watching an active investigation, and standing too close can get you filed as a suspect. 5. If you ever want to genuinely impress a crow, consistency matters more than generosity. The same modest offering at the same time and place, repeated, builds more trust than one enormous one-time gesture. 6. Understand that bird brain was always a bad insult. You were comparing yourself to an animal that manufactures tools, deceives rivals, recognizes faces for over a decade, and possibly runs a passive information network out of a communal bedroom. The comparison was never as flattering to you as you thought it was. 7. And maybe the most important thing, every crow watching you right now has probably been quietly doing this to humans for its entire life, building a private, detailed understanding of your species one encounter at a time, while most of your species walks past without a second glance. We spend so much energy wondering if animals are watching us back. Turns out one of them has been taking better notes than we ever did. I've got an eternity left to keep watching them do it. Honestly, worse ways to spend forever. If you want more videos like this, subscribe.